The shuttle from Osavith Transfer cut its engines at 3:40 local, and I was the only passenger who got off. That is not unusual for the record. The Varith Academy of First Contact Studies occupies a plateau on the fourth continent of a world that is not convenient to anything. The nearest transit hub is 11 hours by short hop, and the Academy's own docking ring, built to handle 16 vessels in the Contactera years, when the place ran at capacity, now handles 1 or 2 a month. I checked the maintenance log during the approach. The log ran to 11 pages for the entire previous year. 11 pages for a facility with 412 interior compartments, 6 life support nodes, a heating plant, 2 auxiliary generators, and a dormitory complex that was designed to house 300 cadets and currently houses 41. I had read the log 3 times on the way over. I had also read the structural survey, the staffing inventory, the budget summaries for the last 8 fiscal cycles, and the faculty rotation records going back 14 years. I had not been asked to read any of these things. I had found them in the public attachment archive of the Academy's administrative filing system, which was technically accessible to anyone with a compact research credential and practically accessible to no one, because the filing taxonomy had not been updated since the Academy's original administrative charter, 42 years ago. I have a research credential. I also have a tolerance for outdated filing taxonomies that most people do not, because I spent 11 years running supply logistics for a deep space school system that operated on a budget built for half its actual population. When your funding was designed for 300 students and you are feeding and housing 460, you learn to read the documents other people set down. My name is Hesavane. I am 58 years old. I spent 22 years in institutional administration before the Compact Restoration Office asked me to take on contract work, and in the 9 years since then, I have done similar assessments for 7 other institutions in various states of deferred maintenance and organizational drift. None of them had been built by a species other than my own. None of them had been the first institution in galactic history to enroll human students. None of them had sent those students back to Earth, and then watched Earth's own deep space infrastructure grow from a concept into something real over the following 4 decades, while the originating academy quietly declined. I do not know who made the request to the Compact Restoration Office. I do not know whether it came from the faculty, the dean's office, or the Varith species' own institutional oversight body, which is called the Accord of Sustained Knowledge, and which does not, as far as I can tell, have any actual enforcement authority. What I know is that the request was made, and the Compact Restoration Office sent it to me, and I accepted, and I got off the shuttle at 3:40 on a cold morning in the 4th month of the Varith calendar year, and stood on the landing platform and looked at the academy. The lights were on in the main building. The central tower was lit, and the administrative wing and the 2 nearest faculty housing clusters. The east dormitory wing was dark. The west dormitory wing was dark. The secondary lab complex, I had found a floor plan in the filing archive, was dark. From the landing platform I could see the heating plant exhaust stack, and the exhaust was thin and intermittent, which meant the plant was running on reduced capacity. I had read in the maintenance log that one of the 3 primary heat exchangers had been out of service for 7 months. The log noted this as a pending item. It did not note who was responsible for resolving it, or what the resolution timeline was. I picked up my bag and walked toward the main entrance. The dean met me in the entrance atrium. His name is Vasrath Oron. He is the 7th dean in 14 years, which averages to 2 years per occupant, and I had found this statistic in the faculty rotation records on the flight over. He is Varith bilateral symmetry, 4 upper limbs, deep blue dermal patterning that shifts with ambient temperature, and a vocal register that produces harmonics in 2 channels simultaneously, which creates the impression that 2 people are speaking from the same location. He was polite, well organized, and had prepared a schedule of introductory meetings that ran through the next 3 days. I thanked him and asked for the keys to the maintenance storage rooms. There was a pause. "I have arranged meetings with the department heads," he said in the lower of his 2 harmonic channels. "The faculty council, the student services coordinator, the external liaison." "I'll need those too," I said. "But first I need to see the maintenance storage rooms, the heating plant control room, and the sub-level supply inventory. If you can arrange access this morning, I'll have the rest of the day free for the meetings." Another pause. Then he produced an access card and a floor map and told me that the maintenance coordinator was available after the 2nd hour. I told him I would start without the maintenance coordinator and find her if I had questions. I had questions. I found her. Her name was Shareth Vaughn, and she had been the sole maintenance coordinator for the academy for 3 years, after the previous 2 had rotated out to other postings. She was young for the role, which in Vareth terms means she had been in the position for fewer than 6 years. Any Vareth administrator under 40 years of experience is considered to be in an early placement. She had spent those 3 years maintaining 412 interior compartments alone, with a supply budget that had been reduced twice. She was not surprised to see me. She was, I think, something close to relieved, though she did not say so directly. What she said was, "You are the human administrator." "I am," I said. "I was told you would want to see the plant." "I do." She showed me the plant. The heating plant at the Vareth Academy is not complicated by the standards of deep space institutional infrastructure. It uses 3 primary heat exchangers and 2 backup cells, drawing from a geothermal tap about 40 meters below the plateau. The system was designed to run continuously on 1 exchanger, with the other 2 cycling in rotation, and the 2 cells in reserve. At full operation, it could heat every compartment in the complex, including the east and west dormitory wings. The plant room itself is in the sublevel, accessed from a service corridor that runs beneath the main building's central spine. It is not a small room. The exchangers are floor-to-ceiling units, and the geothermal coupling infrastructure takes up the full southern wall, but it had the feel of a space that one person had been maintaining alone for a long time. The diagnostic panels were clean and clearly labeled. The floor around the operational units had been swept recently. The 3rd exchanger, the one that was out of service, had a handwritten tag attached to the control housing, not a maintenance log, just a tag that said, in Vareth script, the date it had gone down and a note that the coupling order had been placed. The tag was 7 months old. Shareth did not apologize for the tag. She pointed at it and explained the situation in the same flat, informational tone she had used for everything else. I noted this. In my experience, the maintenance staff of an understaffed institution will either become apologetic when walking a consultant through the problems, as though the problems are their failures, or they will become defensive, protecting the decisions they made under constraint. Shareth did neither. She described what had happened and what she had done about it, and what the current status was, without editorializing. That is the register of someone who understands the difference between the situation and their response to the situation, and who is at peace with having responded correctly to an impossible situation. At present, the plant was running on 2 exchangers, with the 3rd out of service due to a failed pressure coupling, and the 2 backup cells were being used to supplement the reduced output, which meant the backup cells were no longer actually in reserve. If either of the 2 operating exchangers failed, the academy would be running on 1 cell plus whatever the single remaining unit could produce, which would not be enough to maintain habitable temperatures in the main building during the cold season. The cold season started in 11 weeks. I asked Shareth when the pressure coupling had been ordered. She said 7 months ago. I asked if it had arrived. She said it had not. The supplier was a Vareth manufacturing cooperative that had been consolidated into a larger industrial group the previous year, and the new group had reclassified the coupling as a low-priority specialty item. The estimated delivery window was 14 months from order. I asked for the coupling specification. She gave it to me. I looked at it for a moment. Then I asked her if she had the Academy's original construction records, including the supplier manifests from the initial build-out. She said they were in the archive. I spent the morning in the archive. The Vareth Academy was built 44 years ago, and its original construction used components sourced from 9 different suppliers, 3 of which were Vareth-based, 4 Keth-based, and 2 that were, at the time of construction, consortium operated through the early compact infrastructure network. The original pressure couplings in the heating plant, there were 16 of them in 3 different tolerance grades, came from a Keth manufacturing house called Vassarac Consolidated Engineering. I looked up Vassarac Consolidated Engineering in the compact commercial registry. They were still operating. They had been absorbed into a larger group themselves some years back, but the original manufacturing line was still listed as active, and the tolerance grade couplings were listed as standard catalog items. I cross-checked the specification against the compact registry's parts compatibility database. The failed coupling was a grade 2 tolerance fitting. Vassarac's current catalog listed a compatible grade 2 fitting under a different part number, same bore diameter, same pressure rating, different threading standard. I flagged this for Shareth. I also found in the same manifest records that the original installation had included a threading adapter kit, which the Academy had presumably kept, since adapter kits are not consumable. I asked Shareth to check the maintenance storage room C7 for a bin labeled with the original construction manifest reference. She found it in 40 minutes. The adapter kit was there, still in its original container, unused. The coupling itself I ordered that afternoon from Vassarac's distributor network, flagged as urgent institutional infrastructure. Estimated delivery, 18 days. Cost, within the Academy's existing maintenance budget, because specialty low-priority items from the original supplier network cost considerably less than equivalent parts from a new construction supplier who has reclassified them. I attended 3 meetings that afternoon. The department heads were polite. The faculty council was polite and also cautious, the way institutional bodies are cautious when a consultant arrives, careful to be cooperative, careful to give no ground on anything structural. I listened more than I spoke. I asked about the East Dormitory Wing. The wing had been closed 4 years ago when the enrollment figures dropped below the threshold that would justify running its climate systems at full load, given the plant's reduced output. Closing the wing had saved enough thermal capacity to keep the main building and faculty housing comfortable. There were no plans to reopen it. I asked what the enrollment projections looked like for the next intake cycle. The academic registrar, a Vareth faculty member named Oron Veth, no relation to the dean, said that enrollment projections were currently not promising, and that the Academy had not met its target intake in 3 consecutive years. I asked if there was a causal analysis. He said there were several working theories. I asked if any of them involved the condition of the facilities. There was a pause of the kind I have learned to read as a polite institutional pause, the kind that means, yes, but we would prefer not to have said so. I said I understood and moved on. In the evenings I worked through the supply inventory. The Academy maintained a physical inventory of consumables, equipment, and replacement parts in 3 storage areas. The inventory system was a shared access digital log that had last been audited 18 months ago. In practice, what this meant was that the inventory log reflected the physical inventory as it had existed 18 months ago, minus whatever had been consumed since, plus or minus whatever had arrived in incoming shipments that had been physically stored but not yet logged. This is a normal state of affairs for an understaffed institution. It means the institution does not actually know what it has. I know how to do a physical inventory. I have done it in schools, in research stations, and in one occasion in a deep space waypoint facility that had been operating in administrative isolation for 6 years and had entirely lost track of which compartments were in active use. An inventory is not complicated. It requires someone willing to walk every room and write down what is in it. Most institutions do not have that person. They have people who maintain the log, which is not the same thing. The log has a kind of institutional optimism built into it, or perhaps institutional wishful thinking. When an item is recorded as on hand, the log treats it as available. It does not account for the item having been moved, damaged, consumed without notation, or quietly cannibalized into another repair. In practice, the log is a record of what the institution believed it had at a particular moment in the past, degrading in accuracy with every day that passes without a physical check. The longer the gap between the log and reality, the more the institution is operating on belief rather than knowledge. Most institutions operate on belief rather than knowledge, in my experience. It is not a moral failing. It is a resource problem. I spent 4 evenings walking every storage area, every maintenance compartment, and every service corridor in the main building complex. Sharath walked with me after the second evening, once it became clear that I was not going to stop. She was useful. She knew where things had been moved when the log was not updated, and she knew the informal naming conventions the previous maintenance coordinators had used for bins and shelves that had never been formally cataloged. By the end of the 4th evening, I had a complete physical inventory of the Academy's main building complex. It differed from the digital log in 47 line items, of which 23 were items the log said were on hand but weren't. 11 were items the log said were depleted but were actually in secondary storage, and 13 were items that existed physically but had no entry in the log at all. Among the 13 unlisted items were 2 complete sets of dormitory climate control actuators, still in their original shipping containers, that had been delivered 4 years ago as part of a bulk order and never unpacked, because the dormitory wings had been closed around the same time, and the unpacking had not seemed urgent. I found this on the 6th day. I sat with it for a moment in the storage room, with the containers stacked behind me, and then I went to find Sharath. She was in the plant room, running her daily check on the 2 operating exchangers. I told her what I had found. She went still, the Varith stillness that I had come to read as the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. "Those were ordered before I came," she said. "I know. The east wing was closed because we couldn't maintain it." "I know. We have the parts." "You have the parts." She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "How long to install them?" I said, "Depends on the installation manual. Do you have it?" She had it. We went through it together that evening. The actuators were not complicated to install. They were designed for field replacement by a single technician with basic tools, which is standard for dormitory climate components because dormitory climate failures happen at inconvenient hours. The installation sequence was laid out clearly, with torque specifications and test procedures. The full installation for one dormitory wing, 42 units, was rated at 60 hours for a single-person team. I was not a single-person team. I had Sharath, and after I explained the situation to Dean Oron Veth, I had 2 of the Academy's senior cadets assigned as support on their off-rotation days. Neither of them had done facilities work before. Both of them were willing to learn. We started on a Monday. We finished the East Wing installation in 8 days, working in 4-hour blocks around the academic schedule and maintenance duties. The cadets learned to read the torque specifications. Sharath ran the tests after each section. I managed the sequencing and did the work that required reaching into compartments that are designed for Varith body dimensions, which are somewhat different from mine, but adaptable with the right approach. The two cadets assigned to support the work were named Varith and Osren, and they were both in their third study year, which in the Varith academic cycle means they were midway through the technical concentration period. They came to the first work session with the careful, attentive posture of students who are not sure what is expected of them. I gave them the installation manual, showed them the torque specifications, and put the first wrench in Varith's hand. He looked at the wrench, he looked at the manual, he looked at the actuator housing. "It is not complicated," I said. "The manual explains it. If something does not match the diagram, you stop and tell me." He did it correctly on the first try, so did Osren. By the fourth session they were working without supervision, and Sharath was spending her time running the post-installation tests while I moved ahead to mark the next section. On the seventh day, Varith asked me, during a break, how I had known where to find the replacement actuators. "Physical inventory," I said. He thought about this. They were in the storage room the whole time. For 4 years. He was quiet for a moment, processing this in the way young people process the information that the problem they thought was unsolvable was actually waiting to be found. Why did no one look? No one had time to look, I said. Sharath was maintaining the entire building alone. When you are maintaining the entire building alone, you prioritize the things that are actively failing. The wing was already closed. The actuators could wait. He considered this, but they could not wait forever. "Nothing can," I said. "That is why you look." He nodded slowly, with the specific gravity of someone filing something away. I have taught enough people in enough institutions to recognize when a thing has actually landed. I did not make anything of it. I picked up my clipboard and moved to the next section. On the 9th day, Sharath ran the full activation test for the East Dormitory wing. The climate system came up green across all 42 units. The wing had been dark for 4 years. When the lights came on in the corridor as the system initialized, I was standing at the end of the hallway, and I will be honest, I stood there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. It is a long corridor. It has high ceilings, the way institutional buildings do when they were designed to accommodate multiple species. The lights are set into the ceiling in a staggered pattern that the original architects chose, because it distributes the light evenly without creating harsh shadows. And when they came on, all of them at once, the corridor looked exactly the way it must have looked when the academy first opened, before the enrollment figures declined, and the maintenance budget contracted, and the wings started going dark one by one. I picked up my clipboard and went back to work. The pressure coupling from Vasselrak arrived on the 17th day, 1 day ahead of the estimated window. Sharath installed it herself, using the threading adapter from the original construction kit. The repair took 4 hours. The third primary heat exchanger came back online at 1420, and for the first time in 7 months the plant was running at full capacity, all 3 exchangers cycling in rotation, the 2 backup cells back in actual reserve. The plant output was sufficient to heat the East Dormitory wing. I went to see Dean Oranveth the following morning. His office is in the central tower, near the top, with a view over the plateau and the surrounding landscape. It is a large office, with the kind of proportions that signal institutional authority in Varith academic culture: high ceiling, wide floor, minimal furniture, long windows. He was standing at the window when I came in. He turned when I entered, and his dermal pattern, the deep blue that shifts with temperature, had gone a shade lighter than I had seen it before. I had learned, in the weeks I had been at the academy, that lighter meant something like composure under effort. "The East Wing is ready," I said. He was quiet for a moment. I was informed of the heating plant repair. "The plant is at full capacity. The East Wing climate system is operational. I'll need a full inspection walkthrough before I'd certify it for occupancy, but structurally, there's nothing wrong with it. It's been cold and dark for 4 years, not damaged. He looked out the window again. Below, on the main courtyard, 3 cadets were crossing between the academic building and the library. All 3 were Vareth. The Academy's 41 enrolled students were, at present, 37 Vareth and 4 of the Keth-aligned Orvan species. There were no human cadets. There had not been human cadets here in 11 years. The intake application period opens in 6 weeks, he said. I know. The last 3 intakes have been below target. I know that too. He turned from the window. What do you think is needed? I thought about how to answer that. I had been at the academy for 23 days at this point. I had walked every storage room and service corridor. I had sat in 4 faculty council meetings and 7 departmental briefings. I had eaten in the academy's common dining hall. The Vareth food is not designed for human digestion, but the academy had maintained a small human-compatible kitchen since the contact era, and someone had kept it running, which I noted with something like appreciation. I had read the external liaison reports, the exchange program correspondence, and the historical record of the Academy's intake cycles going back to its founding. What I thought was needed was complicated, but what I said was, the East Wing needs new bedding stock, and the sanitation systems need a full flush and retest before occupancy, which Sharath and I can do this week. The West Wing will need the same work I did on the East Wing. The climate actuators will need inspection, and I'd want to do a physical check of the inventory before ordering anything. The secondary lab complex has been sealed for 2 years, and before I can recommend reopening it, I'll need the environmental systems tested and the equipment inventory done. The library ventilation system has a filter that's been running past its replacement interval. The main entrance atrium has a humidity imbalance from the plant running at reduced capacity for 7 months. That should self-correct now that the plant is at full load, but I'd want to verify in about 3 weeks. He was quiet. That's the physical plant, I said. The program questions are yours. I can't tell you why enrollment dropped. I can tell you that when a prospective student or their family looks at an intake listing and sees that 2 of the 3 dormitory wings are closed and the labs are sealed, they read that as an institution in decline. Whether that reading is accurate is a separate question. What I can tell you is that an institution running at full physical capacity reads differently from one running at partial capacity, and that the difference often matters to the intake numbers before it matters to anything else. He looked at me for a long time. The Vareth gaze is different from a human one. The orbital structure is wider, and the focus works differently, so that what looks like a steady stare is actually a continuous micro-adjustment that I am told is not apparent at conversational distances. But I have been at enough meetings to read when I am being assessed. You have been here less than a month, he said. 23 days. You have repaired things that have been on the pending list for years. They were on the pending list because the parts weren't on hand and the staff hours weren't available, I said. The parts were available. The staff hours required coordination. Coordination is what I do. He was quiet again. Then, the Accord of Sustained Knowledge, our institutional oversight body, has asked why you were brought in. They understand that the Compact Restoration Office was engaged, but they wanted to know why a human administrator specifically. I had expected this question, or a version of it. Who made the original request, I said, to the Compact Restoration Office? A pause, the Accord. Then the Accord knows why they asked for a human specialist. What was their stated reason? The lighting in the room did something I had not seen before. I had been told that some Vareth administrative spaces have ambient lighting tied to biometric conditions, temperature, respiration, the subtle chemical signals the Vareth dermal layer produces under stress. The light did not change dramatically. It shifted, fractionally, toward a warmer register. They said, Vasrith Oron said slowly, that it would be fitting. I looked at him. The Varith Academy trained Earth's first cadets, he said. The original intake, 42 years ago, was 12 students, 8 of them human. The program ran for 11 years before enrollment from Earth declined, and we did not pursue renewal. The Accord's position was that the appropriate body to consult on the Academy's restoration was the Compact Restoration Office, and that the most fitting specialist, he stopped, was someone from the civilization that the Academy had once helped, I said. Yes. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the 12 human students who had come here 42 years ago before I was in institutional work, when the contact era was still new, and a posting to an alien academy was the kind of thing that required a specific kind of person. I thought about what they would have found. A full building, lit corridors, climate systems running at capacity, a heating plant with all 3 exchangers online, and the backup cells in reserve. I thought about what it means to maintain a thing so that the people who come to it find it ready. Then let me finish what I came to do, I said. He said yes. The West Dormitory wing took longer. The climate actuators were in better condition than I had expected, because Sharath had been running periodic manual checks on them even after the wing closed, which is the kind of thing a good maintenance coordinator does, and which never appears in any log because it is not technically required. 2 of the 42 units needed replacement, and both replacements were in the unlisted inventory I had found in the storage rooms. The full installation took 6 days. The secondary lab complex was more involved. The environmental systems had been sealed for 2 years, and when Sharath ran the initial diagnostic, 3 of the 8 circulation nodes came back with fault codes. The fault codes, when I looked them up in the system manual, which had been filed in the archive under a reference that predated the current filing taxonomy, and which I found by searching the original construction documents rather than the current index, turned out to indicate a known initialization error that occurred when the systems had been powered down for extended periods without the prescribed standby cycle. The resolution was in the manual. It required running a specific restart sequence in a specific order, and it required doing it twice, 40 minutes apart, and it required someone to hold the circulation bypass valve manually at a specific position during the second sequence, which was fiddly but not complicated. We ran the sequence. All 8 nodes came up clean. The equipment inventory in the secondary lab complex took me 3 days, because the labs themselves were stocked with instruments and materials for a range of study programs, and accurately cataloging them required reading the inventory labels, cross-referencing them with the original program specifications, and distinguishing between items that were in usable condition, items that had exceeded their calibration or service intervals, and items that had been superseded by newer equivalents and could be safely replaced from the current supply catalog. I had done similar work at a research station in the outer Varon network and at a medical education facility on a Keth-aligned world, and the process is the same regardless of the species or the discipline. You look at every item, you document what it is, you document its condition, and you make a decision. At the end of 3 days, I had a complete lab inventory and a prioritized replacement list. Most of the items were in serviceable condition. The list of items that needed replacement was shorter than I had expected, because the labs had been maintained with dry nitrogen preservation protocols during the closure, which is standard for sensitive equipment, and which someone, probably Sharath, again, had kept up even when the labs were officially sealed. I showed Sharath the inventory results. She read through them carefully. Then she said, "When I came here 3 years ago, the lab complex had already been closed for a year. I was told the equipment was likely damaged beyond recovery." "It's not," I said. "I know that now," she said. "I didn't have time to look." That is the thing about understaffing. It is not that the people are incompetent. It is that there is not enough of them to look at everything. When you are one person responsible for 412 compartments, you prioritize the things that are actively failing over the things that might be recoverable, because the things that are actively failing will make you cold and dark right now, and the things that might be recoverable will still be there tomorrow. The problem is that tomorrow keeps getting pushed back, and the things that might be recoverable gradually accumulate, and eventually you are living in an institution that is smaller than it should be, not because it is broken, but because there was never time to find out if it could be fixed. I wrote up the replacement order for the lab inventory items. I submitted it through the standard compact institutional supply channel, flagged as academic equipment for an active educational facility. Most of the items arrived within the standard 3-week delivery window. 2 of the items had longer lead times, and for those, I found compatible alternatives from a different supplier in the compact catalog, which I verified against the lab program specifications before ordering. While we waited for the deliveries, I turned to the library ventilation system. The filter replacement was simple, once I had the correct filter. The correct filter was not in stock, because the filter had been running past its replacement interval for so long that the maintenance log had stopped flagging it as overdue. The flag system had a maximum interval counter and had simply stopped counting. The filter type was listed in the original construction specs. I ordered it from the same Vassarac distributor network that had supplied the heating plant coupling. It arrived in 8 days. Sharath installed it in 40 minutes. The humidity imbalance in the main entrance atrium self-corrected, as I had predicted, approximately 3 weeks after the heating plant came back to full capacity. I verified this with the atrium's own environmental sensors, which had been installed in the original construction and were still functional and had been logging data continuously for 42 years. The data log was an interesting document. If you read it backward from the present, you could trace the gradual decline of the plant's output in the humidity numbers. A slight upward drift beginning 7 months ago when the third exchanger failed. A more pronounced drift in the records from the years when the first maintenance coordinator rotated out, and the second was coming up to speed. A general pattern of minor fluctuations that corresponded, when I cross-referenced with the maintenance records, to every service interruption and unscheduled repair the plant had ever had. The Academy had been keeping careful environmental records for 42 years, and nobody had been reading them. I spent an afternoon with the atrium sensor logs, tracing the history backward. The plant had run at full capacity, with minimal fluctuation, for the first 11 years of the Academy's operation. That was the contact era period, when the Academy was at full enrollment, when the maintenance budget was intact, and when the maintenance team had been 3 people rather than 1. The logs showed a clean, stable environment during those years, the kind of flat, steady readings that mean a building is being looked after. The first intake of human cadets had been during that period. I found the enrollment records in the archive, under the original filing taxonomy, 12 students, 8 human, 4 Orvan. Their names were in the record, their program tracks, their completion dates, their final assessments. Most of them had gone on to positions in the early compact liaison structure, or in Earth's developing deep space programs, or in joint research postings. Several of them had risen to significant institutional roles. One of them, I noted, had eventually been involved in establishing the compact restoration office itself. I read through their assessments for a while. They were standard academic records, the kind that look the same regardless of the species or the institution: program track, course completions, evaluation notes from the instructors. The language in the evaluation notes was formal and careful. The way evaluation language is when the faculty are writing about students who are genuinely outside the parameters they were trained to evaluate. Notes like, demonstrates adaptive problem solving that does not correspond to established cadet performance metrics, and learning curve does not follow predicted progression, Initial performance significantly below expectation, later performance significantly above. And from one instructor's note on a student who had gone on to a senior position in the deep space program, shows an unusual capacity for functioning effectively in conditions of incomplete information and insufficient resources. I sat with that last one for a moment. Incomplete information and insufficient resources. The institutional summary of most of human history, compressed into an assessment note from an alien academy evaluating its first human cadets 42 years ago. I closed the enrollment records and went back to the atrium humidity data. I was not that person. I had not been born yet when the first human cadets came to the Varith Academy, but I had spent my career in institutional work, and the compact restoration office had sent me here, and I was beginning to understand why the Accord had asked for a human specialist specifically. It was not only that it was fitting, though that was the word Dean Oron had used. It was that the Varith Academy had spent 42 years maintaining records, and the records told the story of an institution that had been careful and thorough, and then, gradually, had contracted around the limits of what it could sustain. The contraction was not dramatic. It was incremental, one wing closed, then another, then the labs, then the heating plant running short, then the inventory log drifting out of alignment with the physical reality. The kind of contraction that happens when the work exceeds the capacity, and the people doing the work are competent but stretched too thin, and the things that are not actively failing keep getting deferred. What the Academy needed was not new infrastructure. It was not additional budget, though a budget review would help. It was someone who had done this before, not the specific maintenance tasks, but the larger thing, the systematic walkthrough, the inventory, the cross-referencing, the supplier research, the coordination of tasks in the right sequence, the work of finding out what an institution actually has and what it actually needs and closing the gap between the two. That is what I do. I have been doing it for 30 years. I wrote the library ventilation report in the 4th week. I submitted the lab equipment replacement orders in the 5th week. I ran the full physical inspection of the East Dormitory Wing in the 6th week and filed the occupancy certification with the Academy's administrative office and with the Compact Restoration Office. The intake application period opened in the 7th week. I was not involved in the intake process. That is not my role. My role is the physical plant, the supply systems, the documentation, the processes. Dean Oron Veth and his faculty managed the intake applications, the review process, the selection. I continued working through my task list, the West Wing occupancy certification, the lab complex reopening sequence, a structural review of the secondary landing platform that had been flagged in an old survey and never followed up on. The secondary landing platform was fine. The flagged item had been a hairline surface crack in a non-load-bearing section of the apron, and it had been stable for the 8 years since the survey. I documented this, added it to the periodic inspection schedule, and moved on. In the 9th week, Dean Oron Veth came to find me. I was in the East Dormitory Wing, running through the commissioning checklist for the last time before the bedding and furnishings arrived. He stood in the doorway of one of the rooms and watched me work through the checklist for a moment. "The intake results are in," he said. I looked up from the checklist. 14 applicants accepted, he said. The full intake target for the first time in 3 years. I nodded. 4 of them are human, he said. I put down the clipboard. I looked at him. He was standing in the doorway of a room that had been dark for 4 years, and was now lit and warm, the climate system running quietly in the wall behind him, the light even and clean because the Varith architects who designed this building 42 years ago had known something about lighting a room for multiple species. "Good," I said. He was quiet for a moment. The Accord asked me to extend their formal thanks on behalf of the Academy. I picked up the clipboard again. "The work isn't finished. The West Wing commissioning, the lab certification, the ventilation rebalancing in the upper faculty floor. I know, he said, but they wanted to say it now. I thought about the 12 cadets who had come here 42 years ago. I thought about what it means to arrive somewhere that is ready for you, lit and warm, the plant running at full capacity, the systems functional, the people in it competent and prepared. I thought about all the institutional buildings I had walked into over 30 years of this work, the ones that were struggling in the way that institutions struggle when the work exceeds the capacity, and the deferred list gets longer every year. Tell the Accord, I said, that we're close. He nodded. We stood there for a moment, in the room that had been dark, in the corridor that had been cold, in the building that had been built to house cadets from many species in the years when the contact era was new, and the academy was full, and the lights were on in every wing. Then I went back to the checklist. The West Wing commissioning took 4 days. The lab complex certification took 6, including the 2-day wait for the final environmental readings to stabilize. The ventilation rebalancing in the upper faculty floor took an afternoon, once I had mapped the duct layout from the original construction drawings and identified the single damper that had been set to the wrong position during a repair 4 years ago. The intake arrived on a Tuesday. 14 cadets, which is not 12 and not 300 but is 14, which is more than 0 and more than last year, and 4 of them were human. I watched them come through the main entrance from the second-floor walkway. They were not the first humans to come here. They were not the last. They were 14 people arriving at an institution that was lit and warm and ready for them. And they did not know, and did not need to know, that the East Wing had been dark for 4 years, or that the heating plant had been running at partial capacity, or that the inventory log had been out of alignment with the physical reality of the storage rooms. They came in with their bags and their questions, the way students do, and they looked around at the entrance atrium, the high ceiling, the even light, the humidity at the correct level, and they did not look at an institution in decline. They looked at a place that was functioning, because that is what the place was. Sharath was standing near the main desk when they came in. She had been at the academy for 3 years, carrying the full maintenance weight alone, keeping the plant running and the logs current, and the climate systems checked on the wings that were closed because there was never time to open them. When the students came through the door, she watched them the way maintenance coordinators watch the spaces they have kept, with the particular attention of someone who knows every system behind every wall and every light. I came down from the walkway and stood beside her. "Full house by next cycle," she said. "Probably not," I said, "but more than 14. She nodded. I stayed for 2 more weeks, finishing the last items on my task list and writing the formal restoration report. The report was thorough. It documented every repair, every replacement order, every inventory correction, every process change. It included the updated maintenance schedule, the revised supply lists, the recommended staffing additions for the maintenance function, and the filing taxonomy revision I had drafted with the Academy's administrative coordinator to bring the archive into alignment with the current institutional structure. I also included, as an appendix, a copy of the atrium humidity log for the full 42 years of the Academy's operation, with annotations marking the periods of full capacity and the periods of contraction, and what the environmental data showed about each. It is a document that tells the story of the Academy in the language of humidity and temperature and filter intervals and heat exchanger output. Most people will not read it. I included it anyway. On the last morning, I walked the building from the bottom level to the top. It is a habit I have from years of this work. The final walk after everything is done, before I file the report and arrange the departure transport. Some consultants do the final walk as a formality, a ritual close to satisfy the checklist. I do it because buildings tell you things on the last day that they did not tell you on the first, and because walking every level in sequence gives you a complete picture that you cannot get from a report, however thorough. You notice small things. A duct that sounds different than it did a month ago. A supply room that has already been tidied by someone who has taken ownership of it. The quality of the air in a corridor that has been open for 3 weeks after being closed for 4 years. The sub-level maintenance rooms were organized and labeled, the physical inventory aligned with the digital log. The heating plant was running with all 3 exchangers online and the backup cells in reserve. The storage rooms had been tidied and the bins relabeled with the new filing taxonomy. The East Dormitory wing was lit and occupied, 14 cadets in rooms that had been dark for 4 years. The West Dormitory wing was lit and ready, waiting for the next intake. The secondary lab complex was open, the environmental systems running clean, the equipment certified and ready for the program schedule. The library ventilation was pulling filtered air through a system that was running within spec for the first time in a considerable while. The entrance atrium was at the correct humidity level, the lights even and clean. I stood in the entrance atrium for a moment. I thought about the accord of sustained knowledge, which had decided it was fitting to ask for a human specialist. I thought about the 12 cadets from 42 years ago and what they had found when they arrived, a building that was ready. I thought about what it means to return a thing to the condition it was in when it first did something important. Not to make it new, but to make it functional, to make it the kind of place that can do the work it was built to do. The Vareth Academy had built something 42 years ago. They had opened a door for a species that was new to the wider reach of the galaxy, and the species had walked through it, and what had grown from that was considerable. The Academy had done its work and then had struggled, the way institutions struggle, and had contracted around the edges, and the door had narrowed, and there had come a point where the accord of sustained knowledge had decided that the appropriate thing to do was to ask for help from the civilization they had once helped. I am not a symbolic person. I do not do this work because of what it means. I do it because buildings need maintenance and institutions need someone who can read the maintenance records and the supply manifests and the inventory logs and do the coordination that makes the difference between a building that is warm and lit and a building that is cold and dark. But I stood in the atrium for a moment before I left, and I noted the humidity reading on the environmental panel beside the entrance, which was exactly within specification, and the lights in the corridor behind me, which were on, and the sound of the building. The low, steady hum of a heating plant running at full capacity, the quiet movement of climate air through clean ducts, the sounds of a functioning institution doing the work it was built to do. Then I picked up my bag and went to catch the shuttle.